One of the key plot developments taking place in Philip K. Dick's novel Ubik is the death of most of the characters, for the most part, one by one, although it gets a little bit accelerated at the end when only Joe Chip is left from the team of inertials, with Runciter, of course, on the outside while they're all in half-life. And it's going to happen through a process, we could say, of decay or entropy. And that word is actually used at one point in the novel. So it manifests itself in terms of several key physical sensations, one of which is coldness. The people who are dying off get colder and colder, and that is due to them actually being in cold-pac, which is where half-life is taking place, this consciousness after the physical death of their bodies. Exhaustion is another key facet of this. They find themselves with less and less energy, less capacity to keep moving on, and eventually it leads to a death that is more than an ordinary one, particularly in what happens to their bodies. And we get our first intimation of this in the end of chapter 6, after the bomb has gone off. Runciter has been killed. They're taking him to the ship, putting him into cold-pac, and we find that Joe gets out a cigarette. The cigarette turns out to be dry and stale and breaks apart. And then Wendy Wright, who, by the way, Joe has a real thing for, says, "Did it age us? I feel old. I am old. Your package of cigarettes is old. We're all old as of today because of what has happened. This is a day for us like no other." And it sounds like she's being kind of melodramatic, reacting to the circumstances. But what's going to end up happening is that she will be found in the morning after Joe stays in a hotel. This is going to be happening in chapter 8. He had Al send Wendy to him, but she never arrived. And so we read this. Nobody showed up. Which had it been, Pat Conley or Wendy? He prowled around the hotel room, reflexively working off his fear. I hope to God, he thought, that it was Pat. In the closet, von Fogelsang said. What? Maybe you ought to look in there. These more expensive suites have extra large closets. Joe touched the stud of the closet door. Its spring-loaded mechanism sent it flying open. On the floor of the closet, a huddled heap, dehydrated, almost mummified, laid curled up, decaying shreds of what seemingly had once been cloth covered most of it, as if it had, by degrees over a long period of time, retracted into what remained of its garments. Bending, he turned it over. It weighed only a few pounds. At the push of his hand, its limbs folded out into thin, bony extensions that rustled like paper. Its hair seemed enormously long, wiry and tangled. The black cloud of hair obscured his face. He crouched, not moving, not wanting to see who it was. In a strangled voice, von Fogelsang rapped, "That's old, completely dried out, like it's been here for centuries. I'll go downstairs and tell the manager." "It can't be an adult woman," Joe said. "These could only be the remnants of a child. They were just too small. It can't be either Pat or Wendy," he said, and lifted the cloudy hair away from its face. "It's like it was in a kiln," he said, "at a very high temperature for a long time. The blast," he thought, "the severe heat from the bomb." He stared silently then at the shriveled, heat-darkened little face and knew who this was. With difficulty, he recognized her, Wendy Wright. So she is the first to succumb. And she's, said, "I feel cold, I feel tired." And then this happens to her. The next thing that occurs is that he gets together with Al and he says that there was nothing that the moratorium could do. It had been too long, years. And then Al says, years, chilled. So then they get to there, and Joe says, I don't advise you to look. It's up to you. If I got over it, you probably will. Al looks and says, Lord God, don't open it. I'm not going to open it this morning or last night. Evidently, it happened early before she even reached my room. We, that moratorium owner, and I found bits of cloth in the corridor leading to my door, but she must have been all right or nearly all right when she crossed the lobby. Anyhow, nobody noticed anything. And in a big hotel like that, they keep someone watching. And the fact that she managed to reach my room, yeah, that indicates she must have been able to walk. That seems probable anyhow. Joe said, I'm thinking about the rest of us. In what way? The same thing happening to us. How could it? How could it happen to her? Because of the blast? We're going to die like that, one after another, one by one, until none of us are left, until each of us is 10 pounds of skin and hair in a plastic bag with a few dried up bones thrown in. And so now Al says something important here. All right, there's some force at work producing rapid decay. It's been at work since or started with the blast there on Luna. We already knew that. We also know or think we know another force, a contraforce, is at work moving things in the opposite direction. Something connected with Runciter, right? So now we have a mystery here. And moving forward into chapter 9, we're going to see Al taken off the proverbial board as well. So they have this experience at the elevator. Al sees an old-fashioned elevator and doesn't get in, whereas Joe sees a normal 1990s elevator, and Al realizes, oh, this is not good. Our subjective perception of reality is not mapping onto each other. And he says he wondered how much time he himself had left. Now he became aware of an insidious seeping, cooling off, which at some earlier and unremembered time had begun to explore him, investigating him as well as the world around him. It reminded him of their final minutes on Luna, the chill debased the surfaces of objects. It warped, expanded, showed itself as bulb-like swellings that sighed audibly and popped into the manifold open wounds. The cold drifted all the way down into the heart of things, the core which made them live. What he saw now seemed to be a desert of ice from which stark boulders jutted. A wind spewed across the plain, which reality had become. The wind congealed into deeper ice, and the boulders disappeared for the most part, and darkness presented itself off at the edges of his vision. He caught only a meager glimpse of it. So this is what he's experiencing, even though Joe is not. And he says, this projection is on my part. It isn't the universe which is being entombed by layers of wind, cold, darkness, and ice. This is going on within me, yet I seem to see it outside. Strange. Is the whole world inside me, engulfed by my body? It must be a manifestation of dying, he said to himself. The uncertainty which I feel, the slowing down into, now notice this word, entropy. That's the process. And the ice which I see is the result of the success of the process. When I blink out, the whole universe will disappear. And then he says something else that's prefiguring what's going on. This can't be normal death. This is unnatural. The regular momentum of dissolution has been replaced by another factor imposed upon it, a pressure, arbitrary and forced. Maybe I can understand it if I can just lie down and rest, if I can get enough energy to think. And Joe says, what's the matter with you? And Al says, no, nothing. And he says, they may make it, but I won't. And what do we see happening? Al is actually going to go into the men's room and say, I'm sick. And Joe is going to say, I should stay here with you. And Al says, no, get out of here. Go on, make sure that all the rest of them are all right. And we see Al saying, "It's too late, Joe. Don't look." The men's room had become dark. Al evidently had managed to turn the light off. "You can't do anything to help me. We shouldn't have separated from the others. That's why it happened to Wendy. You can stay alive, at least for a while, if you go find them and stick with them." So it seems like they have a kind of remedy there, but it's too late for Al. So Joe leaves and rejoins the group. We see this in chapter 11, where he's going to tell them, after he finds them in Des Moines, Wendy's gone, Al is gone, and they're like, "Well, that confirms it. We thought that was what was happening." And then he goes to see Runsiter's body at the moratorium. And what is going on there? Emptiness. He saw no one, only a large chamber with pew-like rows of seats, and at the far end, a casket surrounded by flowers. He reached the casket, hesitated, looked down. A singed, dehydrated heap of bones lay at one end of the casket, culminating in a paper-like skull that leered up at him, the eyes recessed like dried grapes. Tatters of cloth with bristle-like woven spines had collected near the tiny body, as if blown there by wind, as if the body breathing had cluttered itself with them by its wheezing, meager processes, inhalation and exhalation, which had now ceased. The mysterious change, which had also degraded Wendy and Al, had reached its end evidently a long time ago, years ago. But something else is going on as well. He finds out that Eddie is unaccounted for at this point, and John says, "She's missing," and Joe says, "But she was just out here. All day she's been saying she felt terribly cold and tired," Don Denny said. "It may be she went back to the hotel. She said something about it earlier, that she wanted to lie down and take a nap right before the services. She's probably all right." Joe said, "She's probably dead." To all of them, he said, "I thought you understood. If any one of us gets separated from the group, he won't survive. What happened to Wendy and Al and Runsiter?" So now they are being, you could say, hunted by this weird force. And in chapter 13, this entire chapter is essentially devoted to the struggle that Joe himself is facing with this, which seems to reveal who's behind all of this. So in chapter 12, he's voicing his suspicions of Pat Conley, his, at that time, wife, the new talent, and there's a blast that takes place. Darkness hummed around him, clinging to him like coagulated, damp, warm wool. The terror he felt as intimation fused with the darkness become whole and real, and they're not sure what's going on. He says, "I feel tired," and realized how really tired his body had become. He could not remember such fatigue, never before in his life. And so he says, "I want to go upstairs and lie down." And now we know Joe, he's going to die, isn't he? So Pat Conley, who seems to be the one who's driving this, is going to accompany him all the way up these stairs in this laborious climb that gets described. And she's taunting him the entire time as well, saying, "You know, Edie Dorn is dead, but you're not dead yet, Joe." And he says, "I want to go upstairs. I just want to lie down." And what we read here is that he feels all of these things happening. "Lying down will help me," he said to himself. He felt an oceanic pull, an enormous tide tugging at him. It urged him to lie down. It compelled him towards one thing alone, to stretch out on his back alone, upstairs in his hotel room where no one could see him. "I have to get away," he said to himself. "I have to be by myself." Why? He wondered. He did not know. It had invaded him as an instinct, non-rational, impossible to understand or explain. We read as well that he says, I'm slowed down, compressed by gravity. His world had assumed the attribute of pure mass. He perceived himself in one mode only, that of an object subjected to the pressure of weight. One quality, one attribute, and one experience, inertia. Right? Pat is, meanwhile, taunting him while he's doing that. Maybe you can make it up the stairs. I'm going to watch you climb. I wonder if this is what Wendy went through. You're a good match for her, you two idiots, right? And he says, that's why Wendy died first, not because she'd separated from the group, but because, and he's thinking about it, because you, Pat, killed her in this way. And he tugs on his coat, and the fabric tears, dried and starved, the material parted like cheap gray paper. It had no strength, like something fashioned by wasps. And he remembers Wendy leaving a trail of desiccated clothing behind as well, this deterioration that is taking place. So he says, I'm going to make it. The force goading me on is feasting on my body. But the force thrust itself against the weight of many gravities, and this is the cost, this using up of the waning body. But the body as a source supply will be enough to get me up there. A biological necessity is at work, and probably at this point, not even Pat, who set it in motion, can abort it. Right? A little bit later, he's got these reflections. Metabolism is a burning process, an active furnace. When it ceases to function, life is over. They must be wrong about hell, he said to himself. Hell is cold. Everything there is cold. The body means weight and heat. Now weight is a force which I'm succumbing to, and heat, my heat is slipping away. And unless I become reborn, it will never return. This is the destiny of the universe. So at least I won't be alone. But he felt alone. It's overtaking me too soon, he realized. The proper time hasn't come. Something has hurried this up. Some conniving thing has accelerated it out of malice and curiosity, a polymorphic, perverse agency which likes to watch, an infantile, retarded entity which enjoys what is happening. It has crushed me like a bent-legged insect, he said to himself, a simple bug which does nothing but hug the earth into the world of the tomb, which is a perverse entity surrounded by its own filth and habits, this thing we call Pat. And she gives him his key, and he enters the room, and she leaves him there, right? We find out. And then, a little bit later, this is in chapter 15, Denny is back, and Denny is going to tell him Joe has been resuscitated by Runciter with the can of Ubik, such an important part of the story. And Joe is talking with Denny saying, I've recovered. And then Denny tells him, when I got out of the elevator on the second floor here, I found her, Pat. It had just begun to hit her. She seemed terribly surprised. Apparently she couldn't believe it. I guess she thought she was doing it with her talent. Joe said, that's right, that's what she thought. Why don't you use the Ubik? So he does. And it turns out that Denny isn't Denny. Denny is Jory. And Jory is the one behind all of this. Jory is going to tell him, oh, I ate Denny a long time ago, right at the beginning, before they came here from New York. First I ate Wendy Wright. Denny came second. And Joe says, what do you mean ate? And Jory said, well, I did what I do. It's hard to explain, but I've been doing it a long time to lots of Half-Life people. I eat their life, what remains of it. There's very little in each person, so I need a lot of them. I used to wait until they'd been in Half-Life a while, but now I have to have them immediately if I'm going to be able to live myself. If you come close to me and listen, and this is a kind of horrific experience, I'll hold my mouth open and you can hear their voices. Not all of them, but anyhow, the last ones I ate, the ones you know. So we've got this terrible being in Half-Life who is consuming the others in order to sustain his own life in there. And that is the answer to why people are turning into these desiccated corpses, why they're succumbing to fatigue, to a bitter, bone-chilling cold, being sapped of all of their life. Now, at that point, Jory can't do much to Joe. He bites him, but Joe sprays some Ubik on him. But a little bit later in chapter 16, Joe is again dying. And he's talking with this girl who's going to turn out to be Ella Runsiter. And he says, I'm dying, miss. The wound on his hand, the teeth marks had begun to throb once more, and they were becoming visible again. This alone would have been enough to fill him with dread. And so he's on his way to try to find more Ubik, which he does in the end through a kind of intervention, let's say. And he's prepared to fight against Jory. But everybody else from his team is now gone, consumed by this half-lifer Jory. And now we know what lies behind this horrific experience of being so tired, of being subject just to gravity and inertia and cold, and finding yourself driven by this irrational desire just to lie down alone and succumb to it. So, very important aspect of the plot that we see depicted in some pretty amazingly stark terms by Philip K. Dick.